Welcome everybody. So today we're going to talk about how to know when you can skip a class and when you can't skip a class. Now this is important for university students because sometimes you have a scheduling conflict. Maybe you have a job that you have to attend to, or a family wedding, or maybe you're ill. And so you may find that you have to skip a class, or you may find that you have to make the decision on whether or not to skip a class. And so this video is to help you figure out whether it's okay to skip a class or not. Now, this video has nothing to do with the school policies or your teacher policies. You need to know what those are because different schools and different teachers are different. The point here is from the perspective of learning, which can affect your overall grade and your performance in the class. So the thing to understand is that not all classes are the same. There are basically two kind of categories of class, at least two that I'm going to talk about today. There's those classes that are taught with isolated topics. You can think of this class like human resource management, where you might have one lecture on recruiting, another lecture on selection, another on promotion, another on communication. And those topics are taught in a way that each topic is isolated from the other topics. And I'll talk more about that. But there's another type of subject that gets taught, and that is like project management. In this case, the objectives and the work breakdown structure and the Gantt charts, these topics actually build on each other. And when topics build on each other, skipping a class becomes much more expensive. And when I say expensive, I don't mean in terms of money. I mean in terms of how much impact it's going to have on your life. So let me go into a little bit of detail here. So when we have a subject that's taught with isolated subtopics, then each topic basically stands on its own. And if you skip one lecture, you can still understand the other lectures. For example, going back to the example of HRM, if you miss the lecture on recruiting, you can still understand the lecture on communications. It's not that they don't have anything to do with each other. Of course, they're connected, but they don't depend on each other. So when you go to the lecture on communications, if you've missed the lecture on recruiting, you can still understand fully the lecture on communications. So this is where all of the subtopics are really isolated from each other, at least the way they're taught, but that's not true for all classes. And when they are isolated topics, it does not mean that actually the topics themselves don't connect and don't interact. They do. In life, all knowledge connects to everything else. When you are in a degree program, for example, if you're studying business, all of the various topics connect to all of the other various topics. So it is still your job as a student, as a learner, to integrate the different topics into a whole knowledge. So everything is going to connect together, and it's your job to actually make those connections. And the more lectures you skip, the more difficult it's going to be for you to understand deeply. And it's going to make this process of integration, this process of making these connections, is going to be more difficult for you. For example, how a company handles its corporate communications does impact their recruitment process. So it helps if you understand communication and recruitment because they interact with each other, although communication does not build on recruitment, and recruitment doesn't really build on communication, but they do definitely interact, and so you're going to want to integrate that. How we do selection in a company will certainly impact how we do promotion, but it doesn't mean that one builds on the other. It just means that you need to connect them. So all knowledge is like this. We need to connect everything into a cohesive whole so we can really gain knowledge instead of just some individual points of data. Now there is a different type of subject that we find in university. Here we have really additive topics. And so you can think of this as similar to building a house, When you build a house, the first thing you do is you lay the foundation. The second thing you do is you're going to put up some pillars. Then you're going to build the floors. Then you're going to put the shell on the outside. And then you're going to finish the house with the roof. You can't put the roof on first. It just is not, it's not only not wise, it's not possible to put the roof on first because it wouldn't be a roof at that point. So in this case, we have some topics where they're taught where some knowledge builds on other knowledge, and you need to have that foundational knowledge before you get the more advanced knowledge, or the more advanced knowledge simply won't make sense. In project management, some of the ideas build on the others. That's not true for all ideas in project management. Some can stand on their own, but there are some that definitely build on each other. For example, if you're studying project management, you'll probably study what a Gantt chart is. And in order to produce a Gantt chart in project management, you need a good work breakdown structure. To produce a Gantt chart without a work breakdown structure, it's going to be very, very difficult for you because you actually take the output of the work breakdown structure and that becomes the input of the Gantt chart. So you need the work breakdown structure first. But in order to produce a good work breakdown structure, you need to have good objectives. And if you miss the lecture on objectives and you think, I'll do objectives later, and then you're just going to jump to do the work breakdown structure, you'll find that you can't do the work breakdown structure. And then you'll be struggling to understand, I don't know why my Gantt chart doesn't look good. I don't know why my teacher won't accept my Gantt chart. It's because your breakdown structure has too many mistakes because you don't have good objectives. And likewise, good objectives require having a good aim for your project. So you have to do these in order. You have to do these step by step. You have to do the aim first, and then you do the objectives, and then you do the work breakdown structure, and then you do the Gantt chart. You cannot do it in any other order. If you try to do it in another order, and you say, I'm just going to produce my objectives, and I'll figure out the aim later, the problem is now the objectives are determining your aim instead of the aim determining your objectives. And that's a problem because now you may not be able to come up with a good aim because normally the aim can be whatever you want, and then the objectives are based on the aim. If you base the aim on the objectives, it's backwards and it's very, very messy. If we skip one of these steps between aims and objectives and work breakdown structures and Gantt charts, it's very, very difficult to move forward and we just end up getting stuck. So what's the lesson here? The lesson is when you have subjects that is taught only with isolated topics, then you can skip a class sometimes if you need to. It's not the end of the world, but you still need to go back and get that knowledge and integrate that knowledge with the other lessons. But you can, if you want to go back and integrate the knowledge later, let's say 2 or 3 weeks later because of your schedule, usually that's okay, as long as you do it relatively soon. But when you have subjects that are taught with additive topics, then if you skip a class, you need to catch up immediately. Don't think, oh, I'll try to catch up later. You can't. It's not that. That's not the way the knowledge is structured. So you need to get it really right away. So take the time to get the early stuff because the later ideas build on that early stuff. So when you're trying to make that decision about whether or not you could skip a class or whether or not you can delay something for a minute, think about, or maybe even ask your teacher, whether the topics build on each other or whether they're relatively isolated. Ask your teacher about what is the cost of missing a lecture. Of course, teachers want you to come to all the lectures, but we also understand you're humans, you're busy, you have your own issues that come up, and so we'll tell you. So just ask. If you have any questions, just ask. Thank you for watching.